Thank you so much for coming and having me. This is a wonderful event. I've had the privilege of speaking at different events in the community, and the organization and opportunity that this event offers is really wonderful. So thank you so much for coming. My name is Elise Rehak, as she said. My main part of my job is working in outpatient mental health with kids, families, teens, on a whole multitude of concerns. And I would say probably the most common thing that I see coming into my office are kids and teens struggling with anxiety. Also, if I am doing a presentation in the community and it is not about anxiety, we ultimately end up talking about anxiety because it's just so prevalent, I think, with our kids and teens today. So a couple of goals I have for our time here today is really to answer these questions, talking about anxiety and normalizing anxiety, that it's okay not to feel okay sometimes. We want to feel that for the shortest amount of time with the least amount of pain and suffering, but feeling feelings is what makes me human. It's not bad or wrong to feel that way. Also talking about how can we talk with our kids and teens about anxiety, about worry. If we notice something is going on, how do we talk with them about that? If they are experiencing worry, how do we support them through that? What are things that might be helpful when they're having a hard time? And then lastly, as parents juggling parenting and work and life and all the hats that we wear as parents, how might these strategies be helpful for us, for ourselves, as we're managing our own stress and anxiety? So I oftentimes get asked, what are we seeing, right? When we are talking about mental health, working in mental health with kids and teens, what are we seeing? And I found this graphic, and I feel like it kind of incorporates or captures it a lot of everything, a little bit of everything. And like I said, anxiety being probably the most common thing, seeing struggles with regulation of emotions, depression is also something, struggles with focus, attention. So I think, again, as we're going through and talking about different strategies, ways to understand our emotions, you don't have to have generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder to struggle from time to time with uncomfortable emotions. And similarly, when we're talking about ways to manage our emotions, these strategies are helpful for every kid, every teen, right? It's not just because you necessarily have a specific struggle. We want our kids to be able to regulate their emotions and manage stress as kids, as teens, to hopefully help them to grow into healthy, regulated adults. That's the goal, right? So take a second when you are coming to a presentation about managing anxiety. Look at the stress curve here. Think about where you might place a student you're thinking about on this curve. And then also take a second to think about where you would place yourself on this stress curve. So my guess is we're all kind of looking at the right side of the stress curve here. I like this graphic because, again, we're talking about normalizing anxiety, right? So this shows that anxiety isn't necessarily a bad thing. So pause the right side of the graph for a second. My one issue with this, and this could totally be my own personal bias, is that optimum stress, that very seemingly large yellow area, again, might be my bias, feel like finding optimum stress is a very elusive point on the curve, very difficult to find, but for argument's sake, we'll go with this. So for a second, just look at the green side, right? Too little stress. There is such a thing. Because we want our students to feel challenged, right? We want them to know their abilities, that they encounter something that's difficult, that's a little bit uncomfortable, and one of two things happens. Either they take on a challenge, take on stress, and it goes well. Wow, I didn't know that I was gonna be able to do that thing, or yeah, it was really hard and I figured it out, right? Or sometimes even more importantly, they take on a challenge, they take on a stress, and it doesn't go the way that they want. And then they're learning how to manage disappointment. They're learning how to manage frustration. They're learning that even if I try something and it doesn't turn out the way I want, that's okay too. We're talking within reason here, right? As parents, we want them to have this safe container to kind of navigate through. But here we're talking about resiliency, which it seems like maybe the keynote speaker was touching on quite a bit as well, right? So stress isn't inherently a bad thing. In order for them to grow and to learn, they do have to encounter things that are challenging. However, thinking about anxiety, my assumption is that you're thinking more of this orange and red side of the graph, right? So we're looking at exhaustion, anxiety, burnout. And when we're looking at this, considering what does their schedule look like, right? What do they experience physical exhaustion? What are their academic expectations, mental exhaustion? When do we rest? When do we take a break? Social media comes into the conversation here. When we talk about social media, I feel much older than the teenagers I work with, because when I was in high school, there was no Snapchat, right? If someone wanted to call and talk to me, if there was a conflict at school, they'd have to call my house phone, right? And my parents could answer. It's a different world. If there's an issue, if there's a conflict at school, it can literally follow them 24/7 if they have access to that, right? So the ability to take a break, to shut down, to turn off, to have time to restore our mental resources can be significantly impacted by social media and technology, which we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So as we go through, looking at what you see in your students, some of these strategies that might be helpful, and what we see in ourselves. So when we're talking about anxiety, I think it's important to talk about some signs, some things that may indicate anxiety. I have my little disclaimer at the bottom here. This is not an all-inclusive list, right? So having something on this does not mean this is generalized anxiety disorder. And also there may be something on this list, something not on this list that could indicate anxiety. But if you're noticing something in your student, in yourself, you want to investigate more. Look into it, ask about it, try to understand what might be going on. When I talk about emotions, I like to break them down into the physical, how we feel that emotion in our body, and the thoughts we think in our head. I think a lot of emotions can have pretty powerful components, but man, anxiety can be very physical, right? It can show up in those what we call somatic ways. So stomach aches, fatigue, headaches, muscle aches, maybe a lot of trips to the nurse's office where we're gonna wanna look into more. Sleep and how we fuel our bodies can be so tied to our emotions. And we can use those things in unhealthy ways when they're so important for us to be healthy, right? So overeating, undereating, sleeping too much, not sleeping enough, really important in our ability to regulate our emotions. And if they're not in a healthy place, we really want to look at that and talk to our students about that. Cognitive changes, so again, the thoughts that we're thinking, looking at negative self-talk, being hard on themselves in ways that aren't true. Maybe they're struggling with some things, right? But I'm a terrible student, or no one wants to be my friend, or that's gonna be a disaster. These kind of extreme absolute statements. Then being less open about school and activities. So when you ask questions, they seem kind of guarded, kind of shut down. And again, as parents, we all get the, how was school? Fine. What'd you learn? Nothing, right? So like, that tends to happen. But again, as maybe we typically could kind of get them to share a little bit more, they just seem more distant, seem more shut down. Increased questions like, what if? Well, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if that happens? Again, wanting to kind of look into and understand what might be going on for them. I added here behavior changes because I think as parents, these are the things we might notice on the outside. For anxiety, it shows up differently for everybody. Sometimes it's kind of that more typical worry, panic, belly hurting, that kind of thing. Sometimes it comes out as outbursts. Sometimes it comes out as shutting down, so decreased work performance, distancing, isolating. So wanting to understand that anxiety can look like different things depending on how it shows up for our students, but wanting to understand it a little bit more to see what they might be struggling with. Okay, so we all experience stress, right? It's not inherently bad or wrong to experience stress, but how do we talk about it? The first thing, and I think this is so important to have this value in our families, that we talk about our emotions. It's okay not to feel okay. Again, I tell people that come into the office, I'm so glad you're here. Let's figure out how we can learn tools and skills so you feel that uncomfortable emotion for the shortest amount of time with the least amount of pain and suffering. You don't want that to be making your decisions. You don't want anxiety to be running the show. But we all experience stress. That's what makes us human. Especially in younger kids, it's pretty often I'll hear there's something bad or wrong with me. There's something wrong with me that I'm feeling this way. There's nothing bad or wrong with you. It's uncomfortable. We need to figure out how you can move through it. But there's nothing bad or wrong with you for feeling an uncomfortable emotion. We want to support verbalizing our feelings. I love the use of metaphor. Some of my clients might tell you a little too much, love a good metaphor. But my metaphor for holding in emotions is like pushing a beach ball under the water. It wants to come back up. Same with our feelings. They're not meant to be held in. So the more I hold that beach ball under the water, the tired my arm gets, right? And it doesn't just nicely come to the surface, it shoots out of the water. Same with our emotions. If our student is holding in, eventually they can't hold it in anymore. It's not, okay, now I'd like to talk about the thing that's bothering me. It's that eruption. And again, what that looks like can be different. It can be panic. It can be angry, like a literal eruption. It can be shutting down, pulling away. So what that looks like is different for every person, but they're not meant to be held in. They will come out. Avoidance doesn't work. It's like if I say, don't think about chocolate, don't think about chocolate cookies, don't think about chocolate cake shakes. We're thinking about chocolate. It's the same with our emotions. It doesn't work. They come back bigger, badder, scarier, stronger. We want to be able to verbalize them to someone that we feel we can trust, that's safe, to be able to work through it. The other thing when we're talking about it, sometimes it can be confusing. It can be hard to understand or even know what they're feeling. So breaking it down again, all right, let's think about what are you feeling in your body? If it's anxiety before school, start at the top of your head, go all the way down to the tips of your toes. What are you feeling in your body to understand it? And then what are the thoughts in your head? What are the things that you're thinking that may be linked to worry, may be linked to anxiety? So I warned you, I love a good metaphor. When we're talking about how we talk about emotions or how we talk about anxiety, I like to use metaphor to talk about it, right? So one way that I'll use metaphor to talk about anxiety is externalizing the feeling. Inside Out and Inside Out 2 with anxiety is the main character is every therapist's dream, right? And that's kind of the same idea there, right? So we're taking this emotion, we're externalizing it. You are motivated and excited and capable, and then this thing comes in, right? It takes over, you feel nervous, you're unsure of yourself, you're second guessing yourself. So again, when our student is struggling with anxiety, there can be a lot of feelings of blame, of shame, of guilt for feeling that way, especially if their anxiety manifests as behavioral outbursts. So if we can externalize that thing, we're working together to manage this thing that comes in, right? It kind of comes in and it's running the show. There's a series of books I have here by Diane Alber. These are more primary. They're the little spot books. Same concept here, right? So we all have these spots within us. Peaceful spot, angry spot, worry spot. And the idea is it's not bad or wrong that we have them, right? Everyone has a worry spot, but we want to know what to do when our worry spot gets big and starts to take over. Similarly, how can we grow our spots like peaceful, like confident, like compassion? In older students, they'll talk about anxiety. I had one student who loved music, so I guess Beyonce's alter ego is Sasha Fierce. So her anxiety was Sasha Fierce, right? So it's kind of personalizing it to them, but this thing that kind of takes over and working together to manage that part of ourselves. Another metaphor, I mentioned the beach ball metaphor in talking about our emotions. Similarly, kind of this eruption idea, we'll talk about a volcano, and parents will come in and say, all right, at school, I get great reports. They do great at school, so wonderful, they don't notice anything at school. They come home, I ask them to put their shoes or their backpack away, and big eruption. So sometimes I feel like students are really good at kind of holding it in, right? It's like the lava inside a volcano. You don't really see it, right? So it can kind of build and build and build. And what makes that lava build can be lots of different things. It can be not getting a good night's sleep. It can be not eating breakfast in the morning. It can be someone says something kind of not very nice on the way to first period, right? So it builds and builds. You have a test, and then you get home, and it just takes that little thing, and that volcano erupts. Again, what that eruption looks like is different for each student. It can be panic. It can be, again, that literal eruption. It can be shutting down. But I think understanding that size of the problem doesn't necessarily match size of the reaction because that lava's already been charged up. So with that idea, we can use that to understand how do we lower that lava, right? How can we start the day well rested, fueled, feeling calm, good, ready to go, so we have more space. As stress comes up, how do we manage that so it doesn't build and build and we can feel like we can manage it as we go throughout our days? So different ways to understand how anxiety might be showing up for your student, and then again, ways to talk about it that when we use metaphor, it can feel a little bit less intimidating. I see your worry spot getting bigger, or whew, is that volcano getting ready to erupt? Where's your lava at? Things like that, that we can talk about anxiety that way. So as we're going through the rest of the presentation here, I really hope that these ideas and concepts can be a springboard for you. I really like presentations to be applicable, that you can leave here with some things that you want to look into, things you want to try for you and your student. But I could do a whole day-long presentation on self-compassion and mindfulness, right? So if you think these concepts could work for you, sound interesting, I really encourage you to look into those, talk with your student about those, because I think they can be really helpful. But like I said, I'm going to touch on a couple of my favorites, a couple that I think are really wonderful and helpful. But it's going to be a brief overview for then, hopefully some further investigation as we go. So again, kind of following that same idea of feeling emotions in our bodies and the way we think about it in our minds, thinking about ways to calm our bodies, and then thinking about ways to attend to the thoughts in our minds. Okay, this is the one that gets me the biggest eye roll in therapy when we talk about deep breathing. But bear with me for just a second, because it is important, right? When we feel anxiety, physiological things happen in our body. Our heart rate increases, our blood pressure goes up, our respirations increase. Deep breathing helps attend to all of those, right? And our bodies and minds are connected. If we can calm our body, theoretically our mind can follow. I like a good visualization, so we'll talk about when we take a deep breath, smelling a flower, blowing out a birthday candle. Some social emotional curriculum will talk about square breathing, so you breathe in one side, hold, breathe out, hold. Figure 8 breathing, again, ways to make it more interesting. We did, I had one guy who loved Pokemon, so we had 2 Pokeballs. One Pokeball was the inhale, one was the exhale, whatever gets them to give it a shot. But the whole idea is slow, deep, even breaths. And I'll have students show me, sometimes they'll do these very shallow, superficial breaths, which will make them hyperventilate, which will make them more anxious, right? So slow, deep, even breathing helps get that oxygen to our brains, to our bodies, and helps us to feel calm and relaxed. I'll also like to attach deep breathing with positive affirmations. So this is from the Relaxation and Stress Reduction Workbook for Kids, and the reference is in the end, but it's called How Great I Am. So you breathe in, I am, and then breathe out an affirmation. So I am brave. I am kind. I am a loving friend. Another one from that resource is called Breathing In Happy Thoughts. It's not quite as cheesy as it sounds, but you're breathing in something positive and then breathing out something you want to get rid of. So breathing in calm, breathing out stress, breathing in peace, breathing out worry. So again, ways to use that way to calm our body through deep breathing and then attaching it with some positive affirmations, positive thoughts. And I get that this is a simple idea, right? But for our student to use deep breathing and kind of going through the steps we've talked about, they would have to identify, I'm feeling something uncomfortable, and then know what that is. And then know, ooh, I know that when I'm stressed, maybe my heart rate increases, or I'm feeling more tense. And then they would have to choose a tool or skill, a healthy tool or skill to help move them through that, right? And I understand most kids aren't thinking step by step like that, but I think if they're able to do that, those are the building blocks of emotional regulation. I know what I'm feeling. I can tell where it shows up in my body, and I have a healthy, helpful tool to help me manage and move through it. So simple an idea, but I think, if we can talk about anxiety with our students in that way, it's building some really important skills for their awareness and ability to move through emotions. Progressive muscle relaxation. So this is one that I learned working with adults. So the idea is that you are targeting certain muscle groups by tensing and relaxing those muscle groups to kind of make them feel more fatigued, right? So if you clench your fists, should never hurt. Just tighten your muscles and then shake that muscle out. If you go online, there's scripts that you can follow that will go from, again, the top of your head to the tips of your toes. But for students, especially those where that anxiety shows up physically, you can see it, right? They just get so tense. They get so, you can just see that build in them. So one strategy is, we call it noodle body. So an uncooked noodle is stiff and hard and straight, like our bodies when we feel tense. And then a cooked noodle is ooey gooey noodly. So we can kind of tense that muscle and shake it out. If you, sitting in your chair, push your heels into the ground, these won't flip backwards. When we're doing it in the classroom, I have to warn people not to flip their chair backwards. You push your heels into the ground, you can tense the top of your legs and then shake those out. There's another author that writes really great social emotional books, Julia Cook. She has a book, Soda Pop Head, where he gets really upset and frustrated and loses his bottle cap. And he learns the push-pull dangle. So you put your hands under your legs, push your body up, grab under your chair, pull your chair up, and then dangle your arms. So things they can do in class, things that they can recognize, ooh, I'm feeling the stress, what do I do with it? Oh, let's squeeze it out, right? Let's get rid of that stress and tension. For teenagers, we'll talk about calm down yoga, seated yoga. I wish I was better at yoga. This is really more just awareness to tension in our bodies and trying to stretch. So you're sitting in class, you're taking a test, having some anxiety, kind of feel that tension in your shoulders. What can you do, right, to kind of roll out your shoulders? Again, things that aren't going to bring much attention to you. Students probably already do them anyway, right? Kind of stretching out your arms, things like that. But wanting to build that arsenal that they have, wanting to feel like, I'm stressed before a test, what do I do? Let's take some deep breaths, kind of stretch, try to get that tension out of your body so that you can feel more focused, be able to feel more calm going into that test. Mindfulness, meditation, this is something that I feel like has gotten a lot more well-known over the past couple years. Great apps for this. I feel like there's some celebrities that have endorsed, like Headspace, Calm is another one, Insight Timer, whatever works for you. But the idea here is that we are paying attention on purpose to the present moment. Right? So this mindfulness means I'm paying attention to right here, right now, without judgment, without criticism, without evaluation of myself, in order to let these anxieties pass. Mindfulness, if you like research, I love research articles and data on this stuff because I think it's really great when there's science to back up what we're talking about. Really, really wonderful studies about mindfulness and how evidence-based it is. I think a big part of it is that it's attending to our bodies because a lot of it uses the breath, taking deep, calm breaths, and also our mind. For mindfulness, there can be a more traditional kind of mindfulness where you're very still, just focusing on your breath. But I also think with some of those guided meditations, there's good imagery, good visuals. If I have to sit and just pay attention to my breath, my mind will definitely wander. There's lots of things going on up here that will distract me. So I know for me that I need something with a visual. I need something that is guided, that I can look at, imagine, A couple really cool studies I'll mention. They did one with biofeedback. So they put sensors on people's fingertips, and then the exercise talked about going to the beach, putting your hands in the sand, feeling the warmth on your face, and the temperature on those sensors actually increases, right? Which again is really cool that our bodies are responding to this. We can actually change how we're feeling, what we're doing based on an exercise like mindfulness. For standardized testing as well, doing mindfulness before standardized testing has been correlated with higher test scores. If there's any stats teachers in the audience, it doesn't mean it causes higher test scores, right? But there is a correlation there, which makes sense. If I can go into a difficult task feeling more calm, feeling more at ease, able to perform my best, it makes sense that I would be able to do that versus the what if and the stress in college and grades and all of those things kind of bouncing around. So a couple mindfulness exercises that I really like. Walking meditation, you might have heard this as grounding. So walking, paying attention to what's around you. What's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. The order doesn't necessarily matter. It's just that if you pick 5 things you can taste, it might be kind of frustrating to do. So make it easy on yourself. If 5 is too much, go with 3. 3 things I can see. 2 things I can hear, 1 thing I can touch, right? But we're grounding, we're paying attention to the present moment without judgment, without criticism, to help those anxieties to pass. Another one is safe place. So thinking of a place, that visualization in your mind that feels calm, peaceful, safe. The beach is up there because that's a place I tend to think of when I think of something calm and peaceful. And then really engage your senses while you're thinking of that. What do you see? What do you hear? Can you smell the ocean? Do you feel the sand? And this is, again, kind of creating your own meditation where you can go to this place in your mind when you're feeling stressed or distressed. Engage your senses in your mind to help that stress to pass. Found this little graphic. I think it's so cute, and I think it really encapsulates what is mindfulness, right? Are you mind space full, trying to take time for yourself, walking the dog, but you're thinking about the grocery list, the tasks at home, laundry, all of those things, which will be there when you get home? Or are you able to just be present in the moment to take care of yourself, to lower that lava, to release that beach ball, so that when you get back, you are in a place where you are more relaxed, more stress-free, to be able to accomplish the things that we have. So when we talk about the cognitive components of anxiety, with younger kids, I'll use an idea what I call sticky thoughts. Sticky thoughts get stuck in our head like a piece of bubble gum gets stuck in our hair. Sticky thoughts are uncomfortable, they're really hard to get rid of, and they're not true. How we get rid of sticky thoughts or anxious thoughts are calming thoughts. Calming thoughts are things that are true, are fact. So some examples here. I'm a terrible student. I struggle in classes, but everyone has strengths and weaknesses. I don't have any friends. I feel uncomfortable around my peers sometimes. I should be able to do this. Should is a really tricky word because it already implies judgment, criticism, that we've done something wrong. I get frustrated when I don't understand something. And I think as parents, when we hear some of these sticky thoughts, or if they're older, we might call them anxious thoughts or thought distortions, we want, oh no, that's not true. You're wonderful, you're great. And they are wonderful, they are great, right? But when we feel something uncomfortable, it seems like our brain defaults to one of 2 options. One being judgmental, critical, hard on ourselves. And I think as parents, we do this as well, right? We are our own worst enemy. We are way harder on ourselves than anyone else, which we're already feeling something uncomfortable, and then we're being unkind to ourselves while we're struggling. And then the other option, it seems our brain gives us, is this: don't worry about it, you'll be fine, it's okay, which can be totally well-intended. I know I've had that said to me, I've said that to other people, but if I don't feel fine, if I don't feel okay, it can feel very invalidating or dismissive. So trying to talk about this third option, right, where we can acknowledge the truth of the situation without judgment, without criticism, and then use some of these tools and skills to help us through it. So a big skill here is self-compassion. if I could give up on a soapbox and talk to teenagers about something, it would be this idea of self-compassion, because I do not feel like this is an innate skill for most humans I've met. Unfortunately, what seems to be our default response is being hard on ourselves, being critical of ourselves. So acknowledging the truth of the situation. Again, we don't want to invalidate. If there's a really hard test coming up, yeah, this is tricky. This is a tough class. And how can we respond in a way that is loving, kind, compassionate to help them through that, so that they can then internalize those skills to help them through as well. My metaphor for self-compassion, it's like if you have a cold or the flu and someone brings you a cup of tea or a bowl of soup, it feels nice, right? It feels physically soothing to feel cared for. It doesn't take the illness away, but it feels soothing. Similar with self-compassion, it doesn't take the test away, it doesn't take the social conflict away. But again, when we talked at the beginning, there's nothing bad or wrong for feeling that discomfort, but we want to know how to move through it with the least amount of pain and suffering. So again, how do we respond to ourselves in a way that's kind and compassionate and loving? And I'll ask students, I'll ask kids, ask teens, would you say that to your friend? You know, they didn't get a good grade on a test. Would you tell them, well, it's because you're stupid, you're terrible at math? No, I would never. And then they're so great at generating compassionate responses if it was about someone else. Well, so-and-so is really good at reading or writing, or maybe they just had an off day, or they can get help from the teacher, right? They are so great oftentimes at being compassionate toward others, but directing that compassion inward, for whatever reason, is really difficult for us to do for ourselves. I think similarly, when we're talking about things that are important, tools and skills, we have to talk about self-care. Again, I kind of alluded to this in the beginning with that stress curve. Every single person that comes into the office, we're talking about, how are you sleeping? Again, sleep is so closely tied to our mental health if we aren't sleeping enough or sleeping too much. Also, the quality of our sleep, not just the quantity of our sleep. Nutrition, how we fuel our bodies, is so important. I'm going to pick on teenagers a little bit here because it's not uncommon for me to have a teenager that comes in and says, oh, I don't eat breakfast because high school starts so early, and I'm rushed in the morning, so I'll grab Dunkin' on my way in, right? It's okay. So you have caffeine and sugar. Got it. And then they go to class. They didn't have time to pack a lunch. They don't really like the school lunch, so they'll grab a bag of chips or something. Then they get home, super hungry, eat something after school, eat dinner if they don't have practice or rehearsal or something, right? And then rinse and repeat the next day. And then they're talking about how it's hard to focus, it's hard to move through conflicts, they're stressed out. And all of those things could still be true, and your body, your brain literally does not have the fuel that it needs for all of the tasks that you're asking it to do. So, I sound like my mom when I say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but it is really important, right? We want to have that the fuel, the nutrition for our brains, our bodies, to be able to do all of the things that we're asking of it throughout the day. Same with sleep. Teenagers, their circadian rhythm is shifted a little bit later. So the sleep-wake chemicals in our brain, melatonin is kind of one we hear about more now. Theirs might be, going to bed around midnight, waking up around, 9 instead of that 10 to 7 or 8. High school starts at not 10 o'clock, I'm assuming, right? So I hear you. You want to stay up later, and getting 6 hours of sleep is not going to be enough rest to do all the things you're asking it to do the next day. Physical health is another big one, just taking care of ourselves when we're not feeling well, rest. Communication with others, again, that's that beach ball. When something is uncomfortable, having people around us, parents, teachers, coaches, directors, trusted friends, people that we can go to when we've had a hard day. Another thing here, again, something I try not to get on a soapbox about, but is technology and social media. There's a new book that just came out this year called The Anxious Generation. If you haven't read it, highly, highly recommend that you do. We read it as a staff at Riverview and actually are changing the way we assess, changing the questions that we ask people who come in based on the research in the book. And it talks about, it's by Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. It talks about research that helps us to understand the impact of technology on kids and teens. Spoiler alert, it's not great for their brains, which I think we all knew. But what I appreciate about this book in particular is that there is research and data that helps us understand the how and why, because it's not going anywhere, right? It is here to stay. So I think as parents, understanding when we do have restrictions or rules, or we are working at building responsibility around technology, the how and the why to do that. Why social media impacts girls differently than boys, the ways that we can introduce technology in safe and controlled ways. But we're talking about anxiety. Again, social media is a great place for comparison, judgment, criticism of ourselves. And I think we experience this as adults too. There's research about adults taking breaks from social media and their mood increases based on their self-reports. So things to think about in terms of stress, in terms of how we support our kids and teens with technology. Again, it's not all bad, and that is talked about in there as well. There's a lot of really great resources that students can have. The way that they're learning, the access to information is wonderful, and having full access to the internet and a computer in your pocket at a really young age does come with some risks that we need to be aware of. So again, what to look for. Distractibility might not just be hyperactivity. Again, sometimes for students, if they're distracted, they're perseverating over those what-ifs in their minds, they can look distracted. Change in behavior or performance, looking into it, inquiring about it. What is going on? Again, we all have different points in our lives that are more or less stressful, but wanting to investigate so we can give them those tools and skills to move through that stress and anxiety. If they are tearful, again, it can be that anxiety shows up as behavioral outbursts, can show up as panic, can show up as shutting down. Some of those somatic symptoms, as well as social conflicts. For teenagers, their peers really are their world, right? So a conflict that can seem pretty, small or insignificant to us as adults could really be very stressful, be following them all day at school, really impactful for them and in their lives. So wanting to understand that more as well. Resources. If you notice that your child might need more support, obviously I'm a therapist, so I believe in the power of therapy, but I will say that therapy does not need to be subscribing to months and years of services, right? Oftentimes I'll have families come in and say, yeah, they just seem to be struggling a little bit more this year. I don't know that it's really that bad yet. Great, so glad you're here. Let's give you some tools and skills. Let's talk about what's going on, help support you as a family so that you can use those things on your own. So it can be more short-term if that's what is appropriate for you. Some students struggle with more chronic long-term mental health concerns and they use therapy in that way, which is absolutely an option as well. But I do like to say that it can be, it should be what you and your child need it to be. School staff, schools can have a whole multitude, teachers, social workers, school psychologists, counselors that want to help. They can't help if they don't know what's happening. So communicating with the school, letting them know what's going on, what your concerns are, so that you can work to build that support system as school as well. And then for students who are struggling more, where we're seeing more concerns with self-injury, where we're seeing, even suicidal ideation, things like that. Obviously that is a more extreme kind of situation, but there are other types of more intensive therapies that can help those students as well. So I'll pause. I know that we have another presenter coming in here they want to get set up for. I'll put my resources up here, and I'll kind of step to the side if anyone wants to come up with any questions, concerns. I'll hang out for a little bit and then can even go out into the lobby as well if there's more follow-up. But again, thank you so much for taking the time to come to this symposium just generally and choosing to learn more about anxiety. I hope it was helpful and you can use some of these ideas to help support you and your students.